the trailer. I bet you liked it. So, you're probably wondering how I made this. So let me take you through a little bit of a ride on how this came to be. First of all, this was imagined on Autodesk Fusion 360. Well, I got a personal key for that and I was modeling all the designs. So basically, this whole thing is 3D printed, most of it, on a resin printer. And I was using the Frozen Sonic Mini 4K, which is a great printer, by the way. Props to Frozen for making such a cool product, such easy to use product. Anyway, so this was printed on that 3D printer. And obviously, when you're 3D printing something, the first step is modeling it in AutoCAD or any kind of CAD software for that matter. So I was using Fusion 360 for that. And when you're modeling something, you need to keep in mind how you're going to manufacture it. So the way I made it is cut this into 6 pieces. So think of it as a circle or a cake. Split it into 6 pieces. And then I print them on the resin printer and then glue them together later using resin and a UV curing lamp, which makes the whole process much faster, but also leaves quite a lot of resin to be sanded off to have a nice smooth finish. So it was quite a lot of work, especially given that this whole thing had around 50 or more parts. And each of these parts needed to be glued together to make one whole piece. So I went through the whole process of 3D modeling it while keeping in mind that I'm using a resin printer to print it, so making it oriented correctly in order to be able to print successfully. So those kind of things are really crucial to keep in mind when you're modeling for 3D printing, especially resin, and even for FDM. But anyway, so I printed them, and it took quite a long time. And honestly, I think it took more than 3 liters of resin to print this whole thing. Obviously, sorry, not 3 liters, 3 kilograms of resin to print this whole thing. And obviously, I don't think this weighs 3 kilograms, but there were quite a lot of trial and error and making sure those tolerances are correct. When you're joining 6 pieces together to make a perfect circular cake, it's hard, especially when the prints are not always the same and maybe there are a little bit of tolerances. So that was a little bit of trial and error, but most of the parts came through really well. Only a couple of failed prints, and most of the time really good prints with a little bit of deviation, a little bit of tolerance differences, but most of them turned out really well. So what I did from there was take the whole thing, sand it down, make it smooth, and make sure every piece fits itself. So for example, this top part and the bottom cover are 2 different pieces which screws on to the middle section. And these columns are 2 pieces which were originally glued together, and same goes for this whole center circle thing. Sorry about that. The hourglass is not doing a great job holding the RAM in place. Sorry. Anyway, back to about this. After I got it all sanded down, what I did was give it a nice priming, like a nice paint coat to make sure the painting sticks to it. So what I used was Gundam painting or model painting, and I have an airbrush and I used that to paint this whole thing. And the colors I used for this is mainly gunmetal for the most part of the body. So 60% of the body is around using gunmetal, 60-70%. And then another 20% was using Starbright Silver, which is like a silver color paint that makes it look like aluminum. So I used that to paint this one. And then what I did was add some copper accents to make sure there is something to pop out from this. So if you see carefully, like these little details are painted in copper color, and some of the larger pieces have silver accents to make the whole thing look more coherent. Now, I want to talk about the theme of this project a little bit. What I wanted to do was something a little bit futuristic but also something that's kind of alien. So this has little engravings that I did with Transformer fonts, which I added when I was doing the CAD modeling, obviously, and all the whole design team trends along with it. And what this is ultimately is a energy container, and I think most of you guys can relate to something like that on games like Doom or Mass Effect or other kind of really cool futuristic games. There are often energy containers, and this is meant to be one of them. And the energy is obviously the Thermaltake XG RGB RAM. So what I wanted to do was have this RAM in the middle and spinning around while this whole thing lights up and looks really cool. So back to the paint, I did a bunch of different coats to get a nice shiny metal looking paint effect. So if you see this does not look like plastic at all, and this looks very shiny, very much like metal. So it needed quite a lot of paint layers and quite a lot of mixing to get a nice perfect metallic effect. So after the painting, it wasn't done. It wasn't done at all. So the really cool thing about this mod or the build or whatever you like to call it, or the model, is that it has a lot of mechanical parts. So it has a moving center part, and each of these pieces here are designed to move out. But sadly, because the time was very limited, we only got 1 month or 1 month plus 1 week to finish this mod. I designed this part to be movable, but I could not implement the whole mechanism at the end of the day. So sorry about that, but I think it still looks really cool now. Anyway, back to this topic. So the center ramp pieces are rotating, so I had to design the mechanical part, have the motors and everything for that. So after designing the mechanical parts, what I did was, again, 3D print using the resin printer, make sure they're all sticking to what they should be and make sure they fit well. And then what I did was assemble everything together and also do all the wiring. Now, why wiring? There's a lot of wiring in this. If you look at here, there's around 6 LEDs here and 1 on the top and the bottom. So that's 8 LEDs just for this piece. And going all around in the circle, there's 6 of them. So 48 LEDs, and all of them are addressable individual RGB LEDs. So that is really cool, but of course it needs a lot of wiring. And this whole thing is run by 2 ESP32s. One is to control all the lighting and the main program. And I wanted to use the other one because of the structure here as a separate unit to run the motors. So they do communicate with each other. So the other one of the key ones, the central ESP32 sends a signal to the slave one, and they communicate between each other to make sure everything happens in accordance, according to the key, the main ESP32. So going back to the whole thing, all of those needed wiring, but there is even more. So this whole thing is a self-sustained unit, right? So it has its own battery, its own charger, and all the other electronics necessary for it to work without having to plug into a power supply. That is really cool. One downside is that I'm using one battery cell. I forgot the number for it. 18650, yes, one 18650 cell, which dries up pretty fast. It drains pretty fast, and then sometimes the motors stop working. So normally I can run it for like 30 minutes or so. But going back to the whole discussion about the cables, there were a lot of cables, and there are some cables going through these channels between the 2 ESP32s, which is really cool, and you can't see them, and this whole thing looks clean. But what's even more crazy about the cables was the RAM itself. So what I wanted to do with these RAM is that I wanted to light them up. Now, I thought many people are not going to light them up, and obviously they didn't, because it is really, really hard. Because these RAM modules are like 5 millimeters thick, and finding LED strip to fit in there is almost impossible. And especially at addressable RGB LED strip? Totally impossible. So what I did was took a standard LED strip and desoldered each of these SMDs. And then I took them up and aligned it with a 3D printed piece, which I later installed inside the RAM modules. What I did was took a copper cable that has an enamel coating and used that cable to solder to those tiny SMD LEDs to make sure the circuit is built with that cable. So basically I made the circuit or the PCB diagram with these copper cables, enamel coated copper cables. And it was a really big challenge because everything is really tiny and it's really easy to break. But ultimately I made 2 of them. I didn't want to do all 4 because one thing, it is time consuming. And the second thing is that I already have a lot of RGB here. I don't want to have too much. And I wanted to have a difference, a contrast between having RGB and without having RGB. Obviously, these RAM modules look really good with or without RGB. So in my mod, I have one side painted with copper to match really well with that black accent. So here they look really nice, but also the original one looks really, really good. And the detail on the finish is really, really nice. I really like them. Again, these are really good RAM, Tough RAM XG RGB. If you want to check them out, head over to Thermaltake website and see how they are. I believe they should have DDR5 RAM. But anyway, back to this topic. So what I had to do for this is that since I had RGB lighting on each of these modules, I had to make a mechanism or find a mechanism to make sure that it can light up while it's spinning. So what I did was find some slip rings, which are little contacts that touch a rotating ring to make sure a signal or a power or electric current can be carried throughout while the whole thing is rotating. So I have installed one of the slip rings at the bottom and the motors at the top, and the whole assembly can move up and down to accommodate for some tolerances. So again, doing all these mechanical parts and doing all the wiring, it was a headache. But what's even bigger headache was coding. I'm from business major and I'm not a person who's really good on software programming. But I can manage to do some stuff. But for this mod, what I ended up doing was I had this idea in mind. Okay, I have this energy container. It's in sleep mode, and when you click it, when you enable it or power it up, it suddenly lights up and charges itself. And that's the kind of idea that I wanted to convey. And I think I managed to pull it off even without knowing much about coding. Well, I did learn quite a bit while I was working on the code itself, and there were quite a lot of hiccups, again, since I'm not an expert on programming or software development. Anyway, back to the whole thing. So what I wanted to have was this breathing effect here. And again, these lighting effects are controlled by the primary ESP32. So this has breathing effect going on. And what I wanted to do was have these little blinking lights. And I'm sure you've seen like really tall buildings have this red light blinking to warn the flights or planes, aircrafts, to make sure that there is a building and they can see it. So I wanted to add that kind of effect, and I believe I managed to pull it off. But what's really amazing is once you have this breathing effect and the whole like sleeping mode, I have a button here installed. It's actually a Cherry key switch that you normally have on keyboards, and I installed it here. And once you press it, you have this power up effect. So all the LEDs are like blinking, like fading, and then they're charging up. And I wanted to have that effect, and I didn't want to have it just one LED at a time. It's just all of them are like charging with a little fade, like a little star trail behind them. And the RGB LEDs on the RAM modules itself also light up, and they're going through this rainbow RGB effect, which looks really nice, and the whole module is rotating, and that is the kind of idea I wanted to have. Again, most of the RGB effects are handled by the primary ESP32, and the motor is controlled by the secondary. But of course they are communicating, so everything works like just one piece. So I think that's the basic thing about this whole build. And of course I glossed through most of the build log and the story about working on it. It was quite a lot of work and took way more than a few minutes of describing to finish that. And that was a lot of effort and time put into it. But ultimately, I think it looks great. What do you think? Anyway, thanks for watching the video. We are having a little competition going on for this tournament. And again, once you press it, it will go back to sleep. So we have this tournament going on for this mod. And if you believe this mod is really good and worth a vote, worth your vote, please go ahead to the Thermaltake community page and give us a vote. Or if you want to check out the other cool mods from some of the really great modders from all over the world, head there and check them out and give your vote for your favorite. Anyway, again, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you next time.